Hello and welcome back to our J Just No Har. In today's tale from Reddit, picture a scenario where an HOA Karen dials 911 to halt your wedding ceremony just moments before you exchange vows. She believed she had me trapped with her clipboard and warnings. However, when I uttered the four crucial words, "This is my private property," the dynamic shifted entirely. How did it unfold? Well, let's just say Karen selected the wrong nuptials to interfere with. And the inaugural Har Reddit post is captioned, "HOA Karen called 911 to ruin my lake wedding, but I own the property." To provide background, I possess a modest lakefront house that formerly belonged to my grandparents. It sits on a little peninsula featuring a shallow cove on one flank and open water on the other. This home existed decades before the adjacent subdivision was constructed. When the developers established the neighborhood, they built around the rear of my plot and created an HOA. My driveway traverses their street via a recorded easement. My grounds, including the path to the water, are 100% exempt from their CC and RS. My deed explicitly states, "not part of subdivision name," and cites the easement details recorded when the developers required my grandparents' approval. Through the years, the HOA residents acted as if the lake was their personal scenery, although most were agreeable. One, however, was not. Meet the HOA Karen. She served on the board and made her introduction during my first week living there full-time. She approached with a clipboard, appearing as if she were delivering a parcel. She offered no wave and didn't inquire about my name. She stated, "We like things tidy on this road. Your trailer requires screening, and boats cannot be kept indoors." I informed her that I was not a member of the HOA. She retorted, "Everyone who utilizes our streets follows our regulations." When I highlighted the recorded easement, she replied, "We will see." That marked the beginning. Throughout the following year, she attempted every tactic. She placed polite reminders resembling citations on my mailbox. She forwarded sign guidelines with comments on permitted paint hues after spotting me buying stain at the hardware shop, copying the entire board. She waited at the corner with her mobile whenever I had contractors, recording their minivans as if they were cartel vehicles. I disregarded most of it and replied with hyperlinks to the deed and easement documents whenever she made demands. Each time, she would retreat slightly only to return with a fresh strategy. Upon getting engaged, my partner and I chose to hold the ceremony in our lakeside yard. We didn't desire a grand ballroom affair. We preferred something modest: lawn chairs, a small arch, a barbecue caterer, a Bluetooth speaker for tunes, string lights, a tent for rain protection, and our dog sporting a bow tie. Since I reside in an area where folks debate if the county sheriff measures decibels with A weighting or C weighting, no joke, I did my research. I contacted the county zoning department and verified 2 points. First, private gatherings under a specific headcount on private land did not require a special event permit unless we were blocking a public street or introducing a stage or alcohol sales. And number 2, the noise regulations specified plainly audible across property lines and included a decibel cap after a particular hour. Nonetheless, the cutoff was late enough that we would be safe. We intended to end the music well before quiet hours regardless. I also phoned the sanitation firm and leased sufficient porta potties for our guest number so nobody needed to enter the house. I secured one-day event insurance via our homeowners provider because I am not foolish. I emailed my neighbors, the sensible ones, a week prior with a cordial message stating, "We will host approximately X amount of guests. Parking will be on my lawn in the side field, and we will cease amplified audio by X00. Please text if anything seems wrong." I did not email the HOA board because, frankly, they aren't my neighbors. They are a corporate body existing to dictate which beige tone is permissible and, I suppose, to extort homeowners. And 5 days prior to the nuptials, this HOA Karen dispatched an email headlined, "Event approval needed," to me and the board. She wrote, "Per architectural review, any assembly of over 20 vehicles utilizing our private road mandates prior board consent. Please supply guest list, vendor list, insurance evidence, proposed parking map, and music plan. Furthermore, no amplified audio is permitted lakeside." She attached their CC and RS. I responded with a single sentence: I am not a member of your HOA, and my event is on my property. Your CC and RS do not apply. I attached a PDF of my deed, the survey showing the subdivision limit, and the recorded easement with the index book and page number. I also included a county email verifying no permit was needed. I kept it brief: all vendors will utilize my easement. All parking is on my parcel, and the noise ordinance will be observed. She answered, we will be monitoring and will summon the sheriff if violations occur. I replied, please feel free to summon the sheriff if you observe anything illegal. And that was that. I assumed it was finished, but I underestimated the boredom level of a person with a clipboard. Moving to the wedding day, the weather was immaculate. It was a glistening lake afternoon with just enough breeze to suppress bugs. My partner looked like a living Pinterest board in the finest way. Our families were actually getting along, the dog's bow tie stayed on, and the barbecue food smelled like happiness. We had vendors arriving all morning, tent crew, caterer, photographer, and so on. About an hour preceding the ceremony, the tent crew foreman knocked on my door stating, there is a woman out there obstructing the road with a golf cart. My easement intersects a brief stretch of the HOA road before it turns into my driveway. So, I walked up. There she sat, parked sideways with a lawn chair beside the cart, clipboard in hand. She said something like, no trucks today. We didn't authorize your event. Our road cannot sustain heavy vehicles. I pointed to the easement stake at the corner where my drive meets the asphalt. The easement text specifies ingress and egress for all usual and customary purposes, including construction. I informed her the tent crew drove lighter trucks than the garbage truck that uses the road weekly. She claimed the board voted no. I told her the board could vote to construct a spaceship, and it still wouldn't make Mars part of their subdivision. She refused to move. I dialed the sheriff's non-emergency number and described that someone was obstructing my recorded easement on my wedding day. They dispatched a deputy. She arrived rapidly, likely sensing a brewing conflict and an easy resolution. He heard both sides. She told him I was hosting a commercial event on our common lake and refusing to obey rules. I told him it was my wedding on my deeded parcel, not in the HOA. I produced a folder, acting like I was presenting a science fair project, containing the deed, survey, easement, county email regarding permits, insurance, vendor contracts, and so forth. I stated, we will maintain volume under the ordinance. Cars will be on my grass and field. Porta potties are positioned per the county document. Furthermore, we are not closing any public roads. This is my private property. Karen attempted to argue again, then essentially froze. I don't mean physically immobile, I mean she had that look as if her brain experienced a blue screen error. She had been bluffing the entire time, and having a uniformed officer view a stamped deed affected her posture. The deputy informed her very calmly that a recorded easement is a valid legal concept and blocking one is prohibited. He requested she move her cart. She huffed, mumbled about a lawsuit incoming, and departed. The deputy looked at me and was genuinely polite. He said, congratulations, by the way. I must state this for the record, keep your guests and vendors on your property and your easement. Do not block the road or use common areas. Maintain sound within the ordinance. If anyone crosses property lines, it becomes a civil issue I don't want to referee. I replied, absolutely. We will keep everyone on my side. Well, that specific phrase, keep everyone on your property, is where the malicious compliance begins. You see, for years, neighborhood folks had been utilizing a narrow footpath right across the very edge of my land to access what they term their community beach. It isn't an exotic Caribbean destination. It is 20 feet of rocky shoreline where they launch kayaks. The subdivision plat displays their property line. Their so-called beach was half on their side and half on mine. When the lake is low, their dock pilings stand in the lakebed, which my surveyor informed me I have rights to utilize. I hadn't made an issue of it because life is brief, and I'm not trying to be the villain of someone's neighborhood Facebook group. People walked the path and waved, whatever. But if a deputy instructs me to keep everyone on my property, I can do that. And if Karen threatens to dial 911 anytime a shoe touches soil, I can truly lean into that reality. So, I returned to the yard, grabbed the tent crew and my cousin who works in construction, and said, "We are going to erect some temporary fencing on the property line to prevent guests from accidentally wandering." I had the boundaries staked for measuring for the tent. I keep a roll of that bright orange construction fence with T-posts because I've employed contractors previously. We strung that fence right along the survey line from the driveway to the water, cutting across the footpath everyone utilizes. We zip-tied "private event, private property" signs every 20 feet. We also placed a line of little buoys with thin rope in the shallow water extending the property line, as the surveyor had indicated the bearing to the ordinary high water mark. Was it petty? Perhaps. Was it precisely what the deputy ordered? Keep everyone on my property. Yes. Did it follow the strict advice of the county and make it crystal clear that nobody from my wedding would be accused of using HOA common areas? Also, yes. Did it sever the HOA shortcut to their alleged beach and dock? You bet. While doing that, the caterer showed me where they intended to stage the smoke trailer and the generator. The proposed spot was acceptable, but I moved it 10 feet so it sat just inside my property line and faced the clubhouse across the road. Before you label me evil, the generator was a quiet inverter unit with a baffle, and the smoker was legal and permitted. We were not smoking during the ceremony anyway. I placed them there because Karen had emailed that no vendors could stage on their road. And the sheriff said, "Keep everything on your property." I wanted a deputy or judge, if it came to that, to review photos and say, "Yep, everything was on ops land." We conducted the ceremony, and it was perfect in all the ways that count. My partner cried a little. I cried a little. Our friends cheered, and the dog decided at the worst possible moment to shake himself dry right next to my trousers. The speaker worked, though. The breeze was gentle, and the barbecue tasted like a hug. We took photos by the water. My aunt, who lives to find faults in any gathering, declared it tasteful, which is the highest possible grade she awards. Then came the moment where Karen attempted her biggest move. She hadn't forgotten her promise to call the sheriff. About 30 minutes into the reception, a second patrol car arrived with lights flashing. You could tell he was responding to a noise complaint because they leave sirens off but use lights as a social signal. He entered the yard, located me, observed the construction fence, the boys, and the speaker pointing toward my house, and asked, "Who is the property owner?" I replied, "I am." Behind him, I could see Karen at the corner pointing like a stage mom. She held a printout of the CC&RS and, I swear, a decibel meter app on her phone. He stated there was a complaint of amplified music on HOA common areas and so-called trespass. I pointed to the fence. I pointed to the speaker. I showed him the county email. I said, "We are on my parcel." We placed physical barriers so my guests don't set foot on their common areas. Also, we are under the decibel limit. We plan to stop music well before quiet hours. The deputy earlier told me to keep everyone on my property, and that is exactly what I'm doing. He asked if he could walk the line. I walked with him. He observed the survey stakes and the fence, and he saw that the footpath was blocked and that the HOA beach was awkwardly, for them, partially inside my fence line. He saw their dock piling and how my boys lined up with a bearing. I had a printout, and he also saw on their side a cluster of HOA residents with kayaks looking confused because their path was blocked, but that was not my problem. The deputy looked at me and said, "Looks like you did your homework." He walked over to Karen and told her loud enough for people to hear, "This is a civil matter. They are on their property. They have a right to put up a temporary barrier to keep their guests on their property. Loudness is also within ordinance. If you don't want their guests crossing your common area, they have solved that for you already." She started to sputter about blocking access and beach rights. And he told her that if they had an easement across my land, they could produce the recorded instrument. If there wasn't one, then there wasn't one. And using a path out of habit is not the same as having a right to it. He walked back to me and said, just keep it inside the fence and keep the road clear. Also, enjoy your evening." And we did. Somehow, Karen trying to shut us down, and the deputy telling her to buzz off, made the party even better. People smiled bigger, the ribs tasted smokier, and the lake looked prettier. The band, okay, a speaker and a playlist, played a little quieter out of respect, but their vibes were elevated. Every time I glanced towards the road, I could see HOA people standing on their side like kids locked out of a treehouse they thought was theirs. Now, here is where their compliance went from petty fence to actual consequences, though. Remember how I said their dock pilings were in the lake bed that my surveyor said falls within my riparian rights? I had never cared because it was not harming anyone and docks are docks. When Karen decided to wage war on my wedding day, I decided later to make sure all advice given in uniform was followed to the letter and documented. After the second deputy's visit, I took photos, my fence line, my boys, their dock, their kayakers stranded on their side, and their HOA clubhouse patio where they had their own little cocktails on the lake sign-up. I also pulled out a folder from my house that I hadn't planned to touch that day. My correspondence with the County Shoreline Management Office. A month earlier, when I was measuring for the tent, I had emailed the Shoreline office to ask where the ordinary high water mark was for purposes of temporary event stakes, and I included my survey. The Shoreline officer responded with a map and a note saying, "Dock structures require permits and must be located within the riparian area associated with the upland parcel." At the time, I had ignored the part about docks because I was not looking to be that guy. However, after the wedding, once we had cleaned up and sent grandparents home with leftover coleslaw, I sent a polite email reply to the Shoreline officer thanking them for their earlier guidance and attaching the photos from that day. The body was short and non-accusatory. "Thanks again for your help in identifying their high water mark for my temporary tent. Also, just for my own understanding, could you confirm whether the dock pictured here appears to be within the riparian area of the parcel to which it is attached? Because my survey suggests the pilings are not completely within that parcel's projected shoreline sites. I just want to ensure I'm compliant on my side." I copied the HOA's generic email address because I'm generous like that. 3 days later, the Shoreline office replied. They don't move fast unless you hand them a checklist of issues. The reply said, "Thanks for your inquiry. Based on the survey you provided and our GIS overlays, the dock pilings shown encroach outside the riparian area of the lot number, and our records don't reflect an active dock permit for that structure. We will open a case and coordinate with the property owner and HOA to resolve it." They CC'd the Code Enforcement Department. I did not attach confetti to my reply, but I really wanted to. The next 2 weeks were a lesson in cause and effect. The county inspector came out, walked the shoreline with a wheel and a clipboard, the good kind, and knocked on my door to ask if I'd be willing to show them where my survey stakes were. And I did. They took photos. Then they went to the HOA clubhouse and took even more photos. And later that week, I saw a poster posted on the HOA's notice board saying, "Notice of violation, unpermitted shoreline structure." The inspector also noted publicly that the HOA had built a small shed near the beach for paddles and life jackets without a permit, and that shed sat partly on my land by about 3 feet. It had been there so long that no one thought to check. Apparently, when you poke the county bear with pictures and maps, the bear wakes up and starts reading everything. The notice required the HOA to either remove the dock or apply for a permit and reconfigure it to fit within their riparian area, and to remove the shed or obtain an easement from the adjacent property owner, which was me, with compensation and recording. The letter also mentioned potential daily fines for non-compliance under the county code. I would have been fine granting them a tiny easement for the shed for a token dollar if they had not tried to ruin my wedding. However, after the wedding day, I was very interested in following rules to the letter. So, the HOA emailed me, finally polite, asking if I would consider a so-called boundary line adjustment or an easement for the shed. I told them I would consider a license, revocable permission, for a limited time while they moved their stuff. Not an easement, though, and I would not consider any adjustment. They said the shed had stood without issue for years. I sent back the deputy's words, "Keep your guests and belongings on your property." I also included a screenshot of their own CC and RS which say no structure shall encroach upon adjacent properties. If they wanted to be rural people, we could be rural people. They tried to argue that the footpath across my land was a so-called prescriptive easement because they had used it for years, but that's a fun term people learn on TV and then use wrong. Prescriptive easements are ugly, expensive, and not automatic. You don't get one because you've been annoying for a while. You usually need open, notorious, continuous, hostile use for the full statutory period without permission. And then you still have to go to court and win. These were neighbors with kayaks, not a landlocked ranch. Also, my grandparents had allowed lake people to walk there as a courtesy. Permission kills hostile use. If they wanted to go there, I was ready to produce 3 old handwritten notes from my grandpa, telling the previous HOA president to please ask folks to stick to your side when the kids are fishing. The bottom line is they had no recorded right and their own rules sank them even deeper. Meanwhile, while the county stuff was brewing, there was neighborhood drama. People talk. A neighbor who's just a human and not a board member told my partner that the wedding night had turned into a Facebook brawl in the neighbors group. Half the comments were, "Why did they fence the path? And we couldn't get to the beach at sunset, and who do they think they are?" The other half were saying, "It is their property. Karen should not have tried to shut down someone's wedding, and we are looking like idiots." Apparently, someone posted a screenshot of the deputy's comment about easements and a photo of the so-called notice of violation like it was neighborhood gossip gold. The HOA scheduled an emergency board meeting, but I didn't go because I like my blood pressure. Later, I was told through the grapevine, though, that it got spicy. Karen tried to double down and proposed that they assert beach rights in court. And another board member, who's an actual lawyer, told her that filing a claim you cannot win just to bully a neighbor is a good way to lose your dividends. The lawyer neighbor also said out loud that the board exposed the HOA to fines by ignoring permits. And this all started because someone could not resist playing cop on a day that was not about her. And that quote made me a little giddy. A week after the emergency meeting, the HOA president, not Karen, emailed me a letter. "On behalf of the board, congratulations on your marriage. We regret any interruptions that occurred. We would like to discuss resolving the shoreline compliance items with the county in a cooperative manner." He asked if I would allow county staff to access the side of my lot for measurements, and I said yes because I'm not a monster and also because I wanted everything documented in triplicate. The county came back with official orders. The dock had to be removed and reinstalled within the HOA's riparian lines if they wanted to keep it. And the HOA shed had to move entirely onto their side or be demolished. The footpath across my site was not recognized. They could apply for an easement if I agreed, but I did not agree. They were fined daily starting on a certain date if they didn't start work. If they removed it voluntarily and promptly, the fines would be suspended. Then came an email from the HOA's insurer because it turns out when you have to move a dock and demo a shed, you want money. The insurer asked me to sign a temporary access agreement so contractors could come onto my parcel to dismantle and move the shed. They also asked if I had any claims related to interference with quiet enjoyment on the wedding day. That's a phrase I had not expected to see in an email with a logo. I did not plan a lawsuit because I'm not litigious, but I did have some costs that I wouldn't have had but for Karen's games, and I had receipts. I made a little list with dates and amounts, extra fencing and stakes, extra labor for my cousin and the tent crew to put it up fast, and a credit to the caterer for time lost at the gate because she blocked the road and they were billed by the hour. I added the rental of an extra small generator because I had moved things last minute and wanted redundancy. I attached the deputy's incident number. I really kept it factual. I wrote, "I'm not seeking damages for stress on my wedding day. I'm seeking reimbursement for out-of-pocket costs incurred directly due to your insured's attempt to interfere with my event and the subsequent need to comply with law enforcement instruction to confine guests and vendors to my parcel." 2 weeks later, a check showed up from their insurer covering those items. It was not a life-changing amount, but it was enough for a nice weekend trip we took as a second mini-moon. It was also a piece of paper with their name on it that said, "We caused this." In total, the shed came down It hurt them more than they expected because they had to hire someone to patch the ground, replant, and repower a little pad on their side that met setback rules. The dock was trickier though. They had to apply for a permit, hire a marine contractor, and pull the pilings. During that process, the county required that the dock be removed entirely for a while. Because of timing with fish spawning habitat, the lake has seasonal restrictions, and for most of the summer, the HOA had no dock. People had to carry kayaks to the water over their rocky side instead of the gentle slope on mine. Remember the board politics? Well, Karen didn't survive after the fines and the check to me. The board held a recall vote. I did not attend, not my club, but a neighbor told me it passed easily. Sharon was removed from the board. I stopped seeing her golf cart parked like a checkpoint at the corner. But I did see a "for sale by owner" sign in her yard months later with an asking price that optimistically included lake access, which made me laugh out loud. And yes, Karen, you have lake access on your side. We are now on friendly terms with most of the HOA. The president apologized in person one afternoon. It was not performative and he said, "I should have shut that down before it started. You're not our problem. We made you our problem." I told him I appreciated the apology. I told him calmly that I put up the fence because a deputy told me to keep everyone on my property and because their board member had repeatedly threatened me with calls and fines. If they did not want fences, they shouldn't force situations that require fences. He nodded. And the next one is an absolutely amazing, satisfying malicious compliance story that you don't want to miss. It is titled, "Take You to Court." Okay, this was many years ago, so I apologize if some of the details are incorrect. It was the year of our Lord, 2006. My big sister had just started driving on her own. My parents did as most parents did at the time, they bought her the biggest pile of junk car that they could find. Relatively reliable, but it was a mid-80s gold Geo Metro. It was a beater, rusty, dented, and indeed very ugly. And importantly for this story, one of the mirrors was duct taped on. One afternoon, in the fading light, she was driving to our local Pizza Hut to pick up her paycheck. On that fateful day, as the sun was going down, someone in a big black Suburban type of vehicle backed into her front driver's side pretty hard. So hard, in fact, that the car was completely totaled. But luckily, my sister was fine. Both parties had insurance, and they called the police to take an official report, and my parents started the hunt for a new car. Some time passes and they get a letter from the Suburban's insurance agency asking for our insurance to cover the cost of the damage done to the Suburban. The Suburban driver was alleging that my sister had been speeding through the parking lot and was therefore at fault. This was news to them. They grilled my sister, who swore up and down and sideways that she was not speeding, and actually that she was going much slower than normal because as the sun was setting, it was hitting the windshield in such a way that made visibility difficult. After some digging, they found in the police report, the sheriff's deputy had noted that the mirror that was duct taped on fell straight down. So, not only had my sister not been speeding, but she was very nearly or completely stopped at the time of the accident. My parents' insurance sent a letter back stating that my sister had not been at fault for this accident and that they were willing to accept the total they had paid for the car several months earlier, a paltry sum of $350. The lady who hit my sister responded back that she would not be paying for anything as she was very confident that she was not at fault and told my parents that they would just have to take her to small claims court. My parents responded, "Bet," and did just that. In order to get all of the paperwork in line for small claims court, they had to take this crappy little Geo Metro to an auto body shop and get an estimation for how much it would cost to replace the panels that this lady had totaled. Well, a car that old was difficult to find parts for, and so they were unable to find anything to replace the panels and the door. So, they gave her a quote for how much it would be to repair those panels, as well as replace the tire and suspension bits that she messed up by backing into it, about $4,000. Just before court, they did attempt to go to mediation with her to attempt to get her to just pay the $350 that they had initially bought the car for. Unfortunately, or fortunately, she was still convinced that she was not at fault. Long story short, my parents were awarded the full $4,000 as it was determined that the lady did not check behind her thoroughly enough before backing out of the parking spot. And that is how my parents made $3,000 on a $300 car. And because it was so nice, let's read another malicious compliance story that you don't want to miss because it is brand new. It is titled, "Manager Insisted We Do Time Sheets After Hours." So, at our work, time sheets have to be filled in every fortnight on a Friday by close of business to be processed first thing Monday morning. Our manager was a really chill woman who would sign off on time sheets Friday morning and then sent them to payroll before 5 p.m. She went on leave because her daughter was having a baby and we got some young dude to temporarily fill in as a manager. As you might guess, this guy was a total douchebag. One of the things he did was insist that we complete time sheets only after we had worked our fortnightly hours. This meant we had to work until 5 o'clock and then get our time sheets signed and then get them to payroll. Except payroll closes at 5 o'clock, which meant we couldn't get our time sheets to payroll until Monday morning and they would be processed late. So, we decided we would take our time filing in time sheets. A lot of us hang around chatting on a Friday because there's a bar across the road that does cheap drinks until 6 o'clock or 7 p.m. So, here's what we did. We would leisurely do our time sheets and douchebag manager would have to hang around to sign them all. One week, we didn't give them to him until right before 6 p.m. And he was pissed. Absolutely livid. This lasted about 6 weeks. I guess something got flagged down somewhere that our whole department was not getting paid on time. The bag manager was quickly identified as the culprit and given the boot. They ended up getting one of my coworkers to take over until our real manager came back. And yeah, guys, thank you for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe to not miss my daily videos and I will see you again.